Hello, hello. How is everybody? You'll notice the promo up there. I guess I'll remind you first of all, before I get started, that the topic for tonight is nausea and getting ready for a possible coup. And if you like my content, please occasionally visit my Patreon account at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. Thank you. Thank you all for being here already. Please share this. And there I am. I think I'm a little too brown tonight. Probably needs a bit of an adjustment to my camera. Seem to almost be in what they used to call cine color or something like that. I think maybe I have too little saturation too, so let's see what happens now. I don't know if that made it very much better. Okay, let's see if that improves things any. Nope. Maybe that will make things still worse. Oh no, that's a little better now. Okay. I guess that's the way I had to go. Still trying to figure out how to set up this camera. Well, I hope everything looks good now and sounds good now. Sorry to be a bit late tonight. I found that I detached the power from my system, so it was 9 o'clock and I had to reconnect everything. So please excuse me. Hi, Kate. How are you? Hi, Carmen. Hi, Deborah. Nice to see you here. Darren Brown, nice to see you. Lana, happy hump day. Hump day, okay. I guess it is the hump of the week, right? Carmen says, I did my good deed. I shared and invited. Thank you, Carmen. Deborah, thank you. Carmen says, I like the warm tone. Thanks. Deborah says, sounds fine. Great. And I guess I'm all set to go. First, I want to describe the feeling that I had when I noticed Joe Biden's tweet when he announced his choice of Harris, okay, for vice president. I guess I hadn't seen the tweet yesterday. I saw the announcement, but I hadn't seen the tweet. Anyway, when I saw the tweet and how he describes her as a fighter for the people and always there for the little guy, I got this feeling of nausea. And then when she replied to him, she replied in equally fulsome terms and described how he was always working for the people, always doing what he could for the little guy. And all I could think of, yeah, he put a whole bunch of little guys in jail. And then, of course, he did more than anybody else to pass the credit card bill to prevent the little guys from going into bankruptcy over credit card debt. And then, of course, he did as much as anyone to start the war in Iraq, the the second war in Iraq, which killed an awful lot, okay, of little guys, both in our country and many other countries too. And of course, I thought of that. Then I thought of all the times he worked for austerity, and I sort of thought, yeah, for the little guy. And then, with respect to her, of course, I thought of all the little guys that she prosecuted, okay, put in jail. And of course, the prisoners she kept overtime so they could fight fires in California at $1 a day in price. And then I thought about the little women that she put in jail for truancy. I honestly couldn't think of one thing she did for the people during all her time, okay, in public service. Oh, and I forgot to mention also how the work that her office did, okay, on mortgages, how it did really very, very little to stop the mortgage frauds in California, and how, when given the chance to prosecute the now current Secretary of the Treasury, specifically Mnuchin, she declined to prosecute him. And later, of course, he gave her the maximum contribution that he could give to a candidate. I'm sure it wasn't actually the money, okay, in that case, because you don't sell your soul for a measly $2,500. But, of course, that was a little tip. Steve gave her a little tip because she quashed the pending prosecution against him. She had recommendations in California from her staff to prosecute him for mortgage fraud. And she decided she wasn't going to do it, and she quashed the prosecution. He never would have made it to the Secretary of Treasury position if she had prosecuted him, okay, at that time. And a lot of the capability that Trump had to do things that harmed our people stemmed from that particular decision that she made. So I got this nauseous feeling. Okay, I really did. What was I nauseous about? I was nauseous about the lies. The lies. These people, the first thing they did when they established their ticket was to lie about each other. Now, I know they have to praise each other in various ways, but they could have found other ways to do that besides making a transparently false claim. A transparently false claim that they did things for the little guy. Both those people avoided doing things for the little guy as much as they could get away with. I mean, Biden tried cutting Social Security. He worked to cut Social Security 5 times in his career. That is well known, very well known. So, here we have a guy, maybe the worst feature of the presidency, okay, of Donald Trump, is that he lies so much. What's the count of lies up to now? 6,000, 8,000, 17,000? I don't know. I can't keep track. But he lies nearly as frequently as he breathes. And then maybe the rest of us are hoping that his successors might have at least a modicum, of honesty. Of course, we don't expect very much from politicians these days. But the health of democracy depends on a limited amount of modesty from the people who hold office, and a limited amount of honesty from the people who hold office. It doesn't have to be a tremendous amount of honesty, but minimal honesty and minimal caution about lying too much or lying in our faces. But the first thing these people did was to lie in our faces. Yeah, they gave speeches that sounded good, far better than Trump, and that stated ideals quite nicely. But the ideals they expressed, of course, were belied by the dishonesty of the claims they made. The first thing they did, in other words, was to gaslight us. Democracy does not survive well in gaslight, folks. That's the first thing we got from them. Hi, Margot. Okay, please share this, everybody. Hi, Matt. Nice to see you. Thank you for commenting. I'll read your comment, a little bit later. He says, the top cop is a victory for identity politics and the oligarchy. I have to agree. A complete victory. We've been routed completely and also once again put in a position, in fact, really more than in 2016, because the situation is graver now because Trump has dismantled a considerable part of our institutional structure. So now we don't have the same luxury we had in 2016 of absolutely making sure that Trump cannot possibly win. I think this time we have that kind of obligation. I feel that kind of obligation. If this state should become a swing state, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to vote for these two rogues. But down ballot, I'm going to have to vote for these two liars. But down ballot, I'm going to vote progressive everywhere I can. And I'm going to start on the campaign now to create a new party so we're never in this fix again. We should have done it in 2016. But I think that Bernie caught us up again in 2017 when it appeared that he was obviously intending to run again. And he kept us in the party while we should have worked as hard as we could to start a third party beginning in 2017. We might have been ready now, at least for many down ballot races. So, next, There was a very important article that appeared in The Intercept, which I want to talk about at some length tonight. It was by Francis Fox Piven, Piven, and Deepak Bargava. Now, Francis Fox Piven is a bona fide lefty hero. She's a sociologist, a student of community organizing, communities. She's always been a radical. She wrote for many years with her husband. I seem to remember they started during the 1960s, about the same time that I started writing. Her husband died some years ago, and she's been going on alone. And every once in a while, she writes something very, very important. Locally in New York, she's always fighting for the progressive side. She's a very important thinker. In the article in The Intercept, she and her collaborator Bargava take up the question, what if Trump won't leave? And she wrote this on August 11th, 2020 at 9:42 a.m. And as I said, it's in The Intercept. I'm going to share it for you now. You should be able to see it. I'll switch to the view where I'm in the corner. I think you still should be able to see it. Hopefully. So in the first part of the article, she talks about what Trump is prepared to do to keep the power of the presidency. And she focuses on his idea that he won't abide by the election results. She points out he has a lot of tools at his disposal to steal the election if he loses, and that he's already putting many of these tools into motion. She asks, can he be stopped? They ask, can he be stopped? And they say, we believe that he can be, but only if most Americans are willing to put their trust in people power rather than courts, norms, and elites to save democracy. She says, the evidence of the risk we face is impossible to ignore. Or again, they say. Trump is questioning questioning the legitimacy of an election that will rely on mail-in ballots even though he himself has often voted absentee. He has threatened to withhold funding from states that are trying to make it easier for people to vote, and he is undermining the U.S. Postal Service, both of which are essential, especially in a pandemic. His Republican allies around the country have been passing voter ID laws, purging voter rolls, and cutting the number of polling places in urban areas, forcing people to stand in line for hours to exercise their right to vote. And to risk their lives also, obviously, because it's a pandemic. And if they have to stand in line and there's not proper social distancing in that line, if people don't wear masks, it can be very dangerous. He goes on, they go on. This is a war on voters who lean Democratic, specifically black people, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, naturalized immigrants, poor people, and young people. We've already seen in Georgia and Wisconsin how these tactics play out on election day. We did see it in Wisconsin, but it's important to note that these tactics failed in Wisconsin, but in Georgia, they succeeded. Trump's administration has downplayed foreign interference in the elections that benefit him. He has given succor to white nationalist groups, and the Republican Party has deputized 50,000, quote, poll watchers, unquote, to intimidate voters, and particularly minority voters, on election day. This will be the first election since 1980 during which the Republican National Committee will not be bound by a federal consent decree that prohibited, quote, ballot security efforts whose real purpose was to intimidate and disenfranchise voters, especially minority voters. Let's be clear. Trump and the Republicans, excuse me, are already trying to steal the election. If all that chicanery fails, Trump still loses. Most people assume that his only option is to concede the defeat and leave, especially if he loses by a big margin. So let's picture what things could look like after Election Day. New voting procedures implemented in response to COVID-19 will make this election feel different to many voters, and also delay the counting of ballots well past November 3rd. The state of New York was still counting ballots over a month after its June 23rd primary. Most people expect a blue shift, quote unquote, meaning that Trump may be ahead in the count of votes cast on election day ballots, but that the mailed ballots will skew. Excuse me. Will skew Democratic. Trump is already crying fraud with absolutely no proof and could use the days after the election to stoke hysteria, rage, and violence among his supporters. To steal the election, we suspect he will adapt the standard playbook of authoritarians everywhere, cast out on the election results by filing numerous lawsuits and launching coordinated federal and state investigations, including into foreign interference He will call on militia groups to intimidate election officials and instigate violence, rely on fringe social media to generate untraceable rumors, and on Fox News to amplify these messages as fact and create a climate of confusion and chaos. He might ask the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security, which he has now weaponized against democracy, to deploy to big cities in swing states to stop the vote count or seize ballots. If he does all this right, he'll be able to put soldiers on the streets, inflame his base, and convince millions of people that the election is being stolen from him. This would create the predicate for overturning the will of the voters. What's his end game? Question mark. Under the Constitution, state legislatures decide how to appoint electors. They have all chosen to rely on the popular vote. But could they create a false justification to claw back this power? If the legislatures in all the closely contested states this fall, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina, are controlled by Republicans. Trump could argue that mail-in ballots should not be counted and ask the state legislatures of those states to appoint electors different than the ones chosen by voters. This would be undemocratic, and illegal. It's hard to conceive how you justify changing the rules for appointing electors after the election. But they, the Republicans meaning, have contemplated it before. Florida's Republican legislature seriously considered doing just that in 2000 before the Supreme Court ultimately stepped in. All this orchestrated chaos could stop the electors from casting their ballots as required on December 14th, or allow Trump to get a competing slate of electors sent to Congress from the states. Either way, he will have pushed our election into January, when the new Congress meets to decide the outcome. At this point, the rules about how to resolve disputes are unclear and could be governed by a badly worded law that was passed in 1887. If neither candidate receives a majority of the Electoral College votes, the Constitution's 12th Amendment allows the House of Representatives to choose the president. Now, you might think that's good news, but the rules in each state give each state delegation one vote. So the lone Republican congresswoman from Wyoming, who, if I'm not mistaken, is Lynn Cheney, has the same power as the 52 members of the overwhelmingly Democratic California delegation. Wow. 52-1. Right now, Republicans control a majority of the delegations, even though Democrats control the House. Still, they control a majority of the delegations. Okay, now this is interesting. What if I was going to raise a different possibility, but that would create even more chaos, at this point, perhaps, so I'm not going to raise it. I'll talk about it anyway as a possibility because, it's just a possibility. If a new Congress belongs to Democrats, both in the House, and in the Senate, they might try to change the 1887 law. But to do that, they would have to overcome a veto by the president because, recall, Donald Trump would still be the president at that time. So he would be in a position to prevent the change of the law. Now, it would be possible, theoretically, to override a veto of his. But even if Democrats have a large majority in both houses, they might not have enough to get enough votes to override a veto by the president. Anyway, if such a law could be passed, then the 1887 law could be changed, and the scenario of one vote for each state would not come to pass. It's also possible that if we have a Democratic sweep in this election, that the state legislatures would change hands in a number of states. And so then the state legislatures there might be a majority of the state legislatures that would insist on sending in the verdict of the voters in those states, who might not try to sabotage the popular vote in the election. We don't know. The point is, things might not work out exactly as Francis K. is envisioning here in this article. But she goes on to say, this is far from an exhaustive list of what could go wrong in the 78 fraught days between Election Day and inauguration of a new president. Experts have considered the mechanisms in our rickety constitutional order that a would-be autocrat could use to defy the will of the people, and the provisions that might restrain usurpation. It turns out that our democracy rests on a set of shaky norms more than on ironclad sets of rules. The possibilities for malign mischief are legion. What must we be prepared to do if Trump questions the legitimacy of the electoral results and won't concede a defeat? We can learn what not to do from the disastrous 2000 election in which George W. Bush lost Florida, and therefore the election to Al Gore, but ended up taking the White House anyway. Republicans famously mobilized a Brooks Brothers riot of young white male campaign staffers. There were many flown in from D.C. to protest the recount and create an atmosphere of intimidation and chaos. Can you imagine that they deliberately did that in 2000? They were willing to do anything to get Bush into the White House. However, Democrats dithered. They mobilized no one and played by Marcus of Queensberry rules. They naively relied on the courts and local election officials to validate Gore's victory. The ultimate result of this pathetic Democratic strategy was not only a Bush victory, but the Iraq War, the racist and inept response to Hurricane Katrina, and trillions of dollars of tax cuts for the rich. Exactly the same dilemma will face us this time if Trump won't accept defeat. Joe Biden's campaign is recruiting lawyers, not organizers. And Biden himself has expressed misplaced confidence that the military, quote, will escort Bush from the White House with great dispatch, unquote. At the time of Inauguration Day. It seems to me that actually the military might very well do that if it were established clearly that Trump had lost. But if Trump has clouded everything up, and it's not entirely clear that he's lost, if he has sown doubt, then the military might not be so quick to act. Anyway, Piven goes on, the Democratic Party operatives, good government types, an army of constitutional lawyers, and other self-appointed experts sorry, excuse me. I have the sniffles tonight for some unknown reason. Will urge us not to politicize, quote unquote, the process, to wait patiently and talk about the, quote, rule of law, unquote, to not, quote, prejudge the results, unquote, to trust the process and the courts, to stay home and let the smart boys in D.C. work things out on our behalf. We need to ignore such advice and take to the streets. We have been through 4 horrendous years in which our vaunted institutions have failed to hold Trump to account, and most notably with the failure to convict him in the Senate after the House impeached him. The Republican Party and Fox News have divorced themselves from both the formal rules and the unwritten norms that constrained unaccountable executive behavior. During the public health crisis, the president and many Republican leaders have shown contempt for truth and a willingness to fan the flames of outlandish conspiracy theories. There's no reason to believe that there are any norms that will constrain this president, who likely faces criminal prosecution when he leaves office. His fellow Republicans have had 4 years to rein him in and have chosen not to. And if you think John Roberts' Supreme Court will save us, think again. For all the attention given to a few unexpected victories for liberals, the court ruled 4 separate times this term against voting rights. While institutions, norms, and elites have failed us, there is abundant evidence that mass protests produces change. We're living in a golden age of social movements. Most recently, the movement for Black Lives Matter changed how white people think about policing in America. Put bold new demands on the agenda, and it's producing substantial, albeit thus far insufficient, changes in policies. The immigrant rights movement responded to the Muslim ban and the caging of children at the border with mass protests that forced a national reckoning with these cruel policies. Workers, often outside of union structures, have taken to the streets in extraordinary numbers, from the Fight for 15 to strikes by teachers, and to mobilizations by Amazon employees and essential workers. They have won big increases in wages and improved working conditions. The Occupy movement reintroduced the problem of economic oligarchy into the political debate. Bernie Sanders's and Elizabeth Warren's presidential candidacies were powered by this movement vision and pushed the Democratic Party to the left. And the, quote, resistance, unquote, groups that mobilized early in the Trump years, the Women's March, Indivisible, and others, have built a muscle memory among millions of people of what it's like to engage in sustained activism. Most encouraging, these movements have recruited millions of new supporters. These groups together provide a powerful social base from which to contest the president's planned usurpation of power. And the movements have substantial leverage in two decisive arenas: politics and the economy. In politics, the Democratic Party relies on voters allied with these movements. If the party decides to play hardball, it can stop Trump from stealing the election. But right now, Democrats can insist on funding for a free and fair election, as well as the Postal Service, and ensure that election systems have the resources and systems in place to accommodate the surge that we're going to have, of mail-in ballots. Just a note here. We have to watch and see what Nancy Pelosi does, whether she holds out for the funding that is called for here, or whether she caves, even though she knows that if she caves, there won't be free and fair elections. There may not be a postal service to help us with that, or our local election systems may not have the resources and systems to actually do the counting. When Trump tries to steal the election after November 3rd, Democrats will control the governor's mansions in Michigan, in North Carolina, in Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. If the Republican legislatures in these states try to overrule the will of the people, governors can push back and send a legitimate electoral vote tally to Congress. Likewise, after the election, the Democratic House and Senate members will have leverage of their own. Getting Democrats to use the full extent of their power will not be easy. It will take a mass movement on a scale we have not yet seen, and the mobilization will need to be sustained for weeks and possibly months. Intense pressure from millions of people that rivals the intensity of the Trump base will be needed to stiffen the spines of national and state Democratic leaders. The professional communicators, technocrats, and lawyers in much of the mainstream Democratic Party and some in the media will be horrified by this call for a mass nonviolent uprising in response to the theft of an election. Culturally, the professional middle-class people in these roles believe that expertise and good judgment, not mass protest, actually deliver the goods. They have learned in their own lives that rational debate, rule following, and conflict avoidance help them to climb the ladder. Unfortunately, these traits and behaviors don't work against autocrats. She might have added, like Trump. Politically, the Democratic Party has for 30 years triangulated, dodged, and capitulated to its ruthless opponents. And since its leaders are from that earlier generation schooled to cower, I think this is about you, Nancy Pelosi. It's about you, Jim Clyburn. It's about you, Steny Hoyer. They will not adapt quickly now. It's about you, Chuck Schumer. The liberal establishment inside of the Beltway will argue for sober analysis, for moderate messages, for following procedures, and above all, for waiting. You must prepare to defy those milquetoast nostrums just as much as we prepared for Trump's planned theft of the election. Overcoming complacency, rampant incredulity that, quote, it could happen here, unquote, and misplaced faith in norms, courts, and elites may be our biggest challenges. And by the way, if the Republicans have deputized 50,000 poll watchers to try to intimidate people, we, the movement, need to deputize twice that many people to watch the polls in our areas. We need to deputize 100,000. And we need to do it publicly so that they know it and their people know it. Another key movement objective should be to force corporate and Republican elites to break with Trump. Doing so will require pushing them to answer a simple question. Is the price of keeping Trump in power greater than the price of allowing Biden to take over as president? Truth be told, Biden should not scare the elite. He's been sympathetic to their agenda on everything from bankruptcy to trade, and has resisted policies like the Medicare for All policy. But Trump has delivered deregulation, tax cuts, and huge numbers of judges for the right's core constituencies. He has, until recently, perhaps been good for their bottom line. So the protests will need to be not only boisterous and performative, but also to put profits at risk. We should plan for and encourage forms of mass action such as work stoppages, consumer boycotts, and rent strikes that target the corporate class. The message from us to them needs to be clear. If you stand by and allow Trump to steal the election, we will threaten your profit. The only thing that would compel corporate titans, and their political lackeys in the Republican Party to abandon Trump would be a crisis. Not a crisis of conscience, but of profitability. So VP nominee Harris said today that what a Democratic Party has what it has is a coalition of conscience, a broad coalition of conscience to oppose Trump. But maybe what we really need is a broad coalition to hurt the profitability of businesses that do not join the movement to force Trump to vacate the White House. If Trump steals the election, a broad united front will have to make the country ungovernable and the reigning regime illegitimate, despite the risks involved. We can take lessons in heart from other countries, from other countries around the world where autocrats have sought to steal elections. We can pull off a peaceful orange revolution of our own. To do so, we will need to encourage mass civil disobedience and dare the authorities to arrest hundreds of thousands of people day after day. If an illegitimate election gives rise to civil disorder that cannot be easily suppressed, corporate and political elites will move to dump Trump to protect their interests. To prevent Trump from stealing the election, we must act now. Movement leaders should discuss these scenarios with their members, plan for action immediately on election night and beyond. We can also reach far beyond the progressive bubbles and talk to other people of goodwill, to local elected officials, civil servants, to members of security forces and faith and civic leaders who will likely be willing to take risks they have never previously considered if they are engaged about the stakes and respectfully invited in. Thousands more people should be trained in the methods of nonviolent civil disobedience. This would be the right way to honor and carry forward the tradition of the late John Lewis, who famously enjoined us to make, quote, good trouble, necessary trouble, unquote, in response to injustice. Organizations should create bail funds and recruit lawyers. Everyone working to defeat Trump should redouble their efforts with a focus on mobilizing voters of color. If we have a landslide, it weakens Trump's hand. And also be prepared to keep staff and volunteers going until June on January 20th. Grassroots groups in key states should be supported with extra human and financial resources, since all of us are depending on them to be able to keep up the fight past Election Day. Everyday people can make plans as workers, tenants, and consumers to organize and prepare to use their economic leverage in the days and weeks after Election Day to cut off the source of profits for Trump's corporate to his corporate enablers. We can also we can organize some organizations for mutual aid, building on the explosion of such effort during the pandemic to support people who take such risks, many of whom already face great hardship. We hope that the worst does not unfold this fall. If the establishment concludes Trump is a menace to them as well as to the rest of us, they may yet rally to find a path to ease Trump out of the way, get him to abide by the results. But we should not make the fatal mistake of underestimating Trump, more importantly, his supporters and the vast infrastructure that is aligned behind him. Trump did not beam into America from another planet. There are millions of people who are driving this authoritarian turn, and they're independent actors unlikely to stand down. If they don't believe in COVID-19 or in wearing masks and do believe in unproven drugs, what makes anyone think they'll believe that Trump lost the election? Fox News and the right-wing social media apparatus are formidable vehicles for mobilization and coordination. Perhaps most and perhaps ominously, most of all, some of local law enforcement have proved to be in cahoots with the right-wing machine. So we should prepare now to respond psychologically and strategically to something akin to a coup. These are dark but plausible scenarios, and we'd be better off facing than avoiding them. The worst of all possible outcomes would be for a broad, united front of anti-Trump forces to be caught flat-footed in the 72 hours after Election Day, stunned by his brazenness in gathering its wits. We must lay the groundwork now for the kind of mass action that defends democracy and evicts this despicable, racist, wannabe authoritarian from the White House. In so doing, we will remind ourselves that our democracy specifically American democracy, is not a set of institutions or rules or an event that happens once every 4 years. It is what everyday people do to participate in and shape the life of our country. I thought it was important to read that to you, to do a little bit of commenting on it, and then to discuss it with you, because I think the authors are right, and that Piven and her collaborator Bargava have done us a real service in writing this article and reminding us about the need to organize for real resistance, not just from now until the election, but after Election Day as well. This is really so important. You know that I believe that due to the effects of COVID on our health and on the economy too, that the gap in polls will be growing again shortly, until by November it is very, very, very large. But that is not going to stop Trump from trying to seize power. And if I'm right, and even if it does remain very, very, very large, so that people suspect that any attempted seizure of power by Trump is just that, an illegitimate seizure of power, a coup, because he lost. I think that's going to be the scenario which is most likely. People believe that he lost, but he will seize power anyway. And that's when we have to be ready. If we are ready and we are mobilized and we are motivated and he and the others know it, then when the elites realize that a coup by Trump is not going to be an easy thing to put through, that it won't be put through without a great fight, and that Trump well could lose in that effort, I think the business elites are basically cowards. They will not fight. If they think it will cost them their profits, they will back off and they will turn against Trump. And they will go into his office as people went into Nixon's office, and they will tell him that it is all over and that he has to get out. And as he sees people deserting him, people he thought he could count on, he, the bully, will lose heart and he will give up. But it is up to us to put that kind of pressure on them that will produce that sort of a reaction. To do that, we have to keep up the organization. Okay, and I put to you, it is not even so much the job of organizing to get Joe Biden elected. I actually don't think that we should be doing that. There are plenty of people who are going to be doing that. We know what our choices are. Okay, most of us know what their choices are. And we have the right to make those particular choices. But we also have to remember that if this is not to be the last of those kinds of choices that we ever make, We have to be organized. We have to be mobilized to block the coup attempt, which may very well come, and which is even more likely to come if we are not organized. The best deterrent to a coup is for us to organize in the way Piven and her collaborator Bargeva suggest. And if we are a formidable organization force by election day, with financial resources, with legal resources, and with a considerable amount of organizational power, then they are far less likely to attempt the coup that Trump would like to see. So, now I will go to your comments and ask you what you think about this. And Matt said earlier, back about 9:15, he said earlier, the MSM pushed her so hard early on and gave her many months of great press coverage, and she still couldn't make significant gains with the voters, okay, the electorate. Yes, Matt, you're absolutely right. She had every advantage. She was their favorite at first. They did everything they could to push her. She wasn't very formidable as a campaigner. She just wasn't very formidable. She did not do well. She spent her time, I think she spent most of her time trying to raise money. She didn't spend her time actually organizing a campaign. In fact, she wasn't near as good at organizing a campaign, okay, as Buttigieg was. He was better at that than she was. I have to give them that. He wasn't as good as Bernie, and he cheated, but he was better than she. Carmen said, sounds like HRC when she pushed for Adolf Hitler. Marco says, hi, Dr. Joe, and everyone. Carmen says, greetings, nice that you're here. Carmen says, hi, Gigi. And Matt says, Warren, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, what will their roles be in a Biden administration? Well, Klobuchar, okay, and Warren have Senate seats, of course. And in Klobuchar's case, she appears to have a very safe one. She appears to be popular in her state, though I've never known why. So she may think that she's really giving up something and may not want to serve in Biden's administration. Now, probably Buttigieg will want a job in the administration because he will think that if he gets one, he may be in a better position to run again in the future. As for Warren, she is more in a position that if she could get a plum job in the Biden administration, like, for example, Secretary of the Treasury, or something like that. I don't know if she could, but if she could get that sort of a position, she might be willing to come out of the Senate. I don't think she'd do that in order to become HUD Secretary, let's say, or something like that, or Secretary of Labor. I don't think she would do it for that. But for Secretary of the Treasury, she might do it. If she could be Attorney General, she might do it also. But Evelina says, hope none laugh out loud. Carmen says, especially since it'll be cold on election day and people will be coughing and sneezing. Right. It'll be cold in certain parts of the country. In other parts of the country, it won't be very cold. Probably here, it won't be very cold. Kay says, so very sick of voting for the lesser of two evils. I'm in Ohio, so looks like I will have to do it again. Shake my head. Kay says, I doubt he will win this redneck state anyway, but have to do what I need to anyway, I guess. Yes, it'll be greatly appreciated, Kay. Sandy says, hello, sorry I am late. That's okay, Sandy. And Kay says, hi, Sandy. Carmen says, doctor, take some of your vitamin C with rose hips. It'll stop those sniffles. Okay, I don't think that I really have a cold or anything like that. I do think, okay, it's allergies. It just happens that the allergy has hit me tonight during my time with you here. Kay says, the mine have been awful for quite a few weeks already. Yeah, Bonnie is also suffering from something that's probably an allergy. Sandy says, hi, Kay. Sandy says, shared. Thank you, Sandy. Evelina says, wouldn't you think Dems would make a deal with Trump, promising him he won't be prosecuted if he leaves? I don't know if all the Democrats would make that deal. I'm not sure the Attorney General of New York, okay, would make that deal. What would she stand to gain? She probably wants to get Trump and to enforce the laws, okay, of New York. Okay, so he might not be prosecuted for the federal crimes that he committed. He could probably get immunity from those in some kind of deal, okay, especially if Biden is his successor. I don't think Biden thinks much on the issue of the moral hazard he creates by making that kind of a deal with people. So he could probably get that one, okay, from Biden, but that won't stop the Attorney General of New York. And Rainer Keefe says, when your campaign slogan is, quote, nothing will really change, unquote. Evelina says, could not would. Rainer Keefe says, at least Trump, okay, isn't a neoliberal. Sandy says, no, he's just a fascist. And by the way, the fascist is the worst kind, okay, of neoliberal. He might not be technically a neoliberal, but Trump is all about corporate control of the economy. Evelina says that neoconservatives are just as bad. I don't think Trump's a neoconservative either. I think he's a fascist, out-and-out fascist. Carmen says he's trying to privatize Social Security and the post office. How is he not a neoliberal? Carmen says, I'm not scared to go to jail. Sandy says, Trump is a multifaceted Looney Tune. Kay says, shouldn't have to go to jail to have a free and fair election. Shake my head. Kay says, we need to get money out of politics ASAP. We can't get money out of politics ASAP. There's no way to manage it. Okay, and so Rainier says, it appears, understands MMT, and his past move is exposing MMT as the correct understanding, macroeconomics. I'm sorry, Rainier, I did not understand that sentence, okay, exactly. I'm not sure who it is. Sandy says the military should oversee the elections. I don't think there's any mechanism for us to make that happen, and I'm not sure we would want to set the precedent. I don't even think the military would like it. It would put us in a category with places like Turkey, Brazil, places like that in the past. Kay says, a junk of DYT is making a progressive PAC to help down ballot progressive candidates. Yes, I know. Evelyn says, I do believe there is a need, Kay, to prepare for the worst. Can't hurt. Joe, my husband asks, what was this article again? He's an attorney. But Deborah, the article is linked to in the description on Facebook. Okay, it's an article from The Intercept. All you have to do is click on the link in the description, and your husband can get the article. It's by Piven and Bargava. Kay says, Evelina, this will be the worst in my whole lifetime, and I am 67. You're just a youngster, Kay. Just a youngster. I am 81. On the wrong side of 81, sliding down fast to 82. Carmen says, perhaps that is the reason why DT won't act on COVID and enough for the economy to sicken the masses to the point they can't stand up to the fascist coup. I don't know, it could be in his mind somewhere, what he calls a mind somewhere. Evelyn says, I agree, there's no need to campaign for Biden. He hasn't campaigned himself. Laugh out loud. Yeah. That, is very true. Darren Brown says, it's a book by Lawrence Douglas, quote, Will He Go, unquote, that explores many of the same ideas. Only read an excerpt online. What's probably different about this article is the way Piven actually lays out what's necessary for the resistance, because that's the area in which she has specialized in. Basically, organization of communities from the bottom up. That's been her sociology, organizing the poor and the disadvantaged to resist and build structures of civil society they can use to help themselves. Glenna May says, I like what you laid out. Well, thank you, Glenna. It was actually Frances who laid it out. Okay, not me. I just read what she laid out. Carmen says, I can't say that I didn't see the fascism coming. As soon as I read that he kept a Hitler Nazi book on his bedtime table, I knew what was up. Yeah, me too. In fact, he did not just keep a Hitler Nazi book. The book he kept was Mein Kampf, which laid out basically the blueprint that Hitler was using. And Kay says she needs to stay in the Senate. Evelina says, do you think Trump is really afraid, of going to jail? I don't think. It all depends on what jail he goes to. If he goes to a jail where he can't control things, and if he has to live out the rest of his life in that jail, I do think he's afraid of going to that kind of jail. He may not be able to control where he is sentenced to serve. Kay says, but Bernie needs to endorse Ed Markey in the Senate too. Hasn't he endorsed Ed Markey? I was sure he did. I mean, I think he loves Ed Markey. He works with Ed Markey all the time. Kay says, Biden says he won't pardon Rump. Yeah, he said that, and he said he won't stand in the way of the Department of Justice if they decide to prosecute Trump. Okay. So since Biden has said that, that gives an incentive to Trump, okay, to make a deal. Kay says, the last few years since Scott died has aged me badly, Joe. And laugh out loud. Kay, maybe you need a new lease on life. And Carmen said, that Barry would label Pippin as Antifa. And he said, Barr, not Barry. Yeah, he could label her anything he wants, but all she's advocated for is nonviolent resistance, a nonviolent movement. And that's not Antifa. Antifa is about self-defense, whether armed, okay, or not. And they're not afraid to actually go into battle. But Barr has a little bit of a problem. Antifa is not a formal organization. It seems to be a name for people who come together under a vague sort of ideological sloganeering to resist what appear to be more coherent fascist demonstrations of one kind or another. The Antifa groups seem more amorphous than that, and not to be embodied in an organization. And that's important because it's harder to get at them. It's easier to throw labels around, but it's also easier to counter those labels because there's no real organization there for them to organize around. Any more comments or questions? Carmen says, right, they're not a group, they're a consciousness, right. So it seems to me the movement for a People's Party should pick up, okay, on Piven's article, and that it would be very useful to them if they could be the nucleus for such a resistance. In other words, while they establish the People's Party as a new third party, and while they do what they can in this particular election, to see to it that the Congress is more progressive and more in line with their ideals, they should also use their organization to help to organize the movement that Piven is calling for here. That would be a very important contribution that they could make over the next few months, over the next 90 or so days. So we are ready. We are ready on election day to resist. One more thing, okay, about election day, okay, that I want to say. Based on the polling I've recently seen, the people who are more likely to want to vote by mail, or at least who are more likely to resist actually coming out to the polls, if they had to come out to the polls. At this point, I don't know, Sandy, who the candidates for the People's Party are. The demographic segments of the population that are more likely to come out on the day of election okay, are people under 45. And those are exactly the people who are likely to be most interested in getting Trump out of office, most motivated to get rid of Trump. The people Trump is strongest with, people over 45 and older seniors. And by the way, Biden has a lead in all the demographic segments at this point. There's no demographic segment in which Trump is ahead in the last poll I saw, and that was a Morning Consult poll. Okay, so those are the people, the actual Trump people, or most Trump people, who are most likely to want to vote by mail. And right now, Trump is trying to sabotage their chances. Kay says, suggested to them, Joe. And Glenna Mayer says, thanks for the hope. We needed it today. Yes, we do need it. Carmen says, when do you think we may get an economic recovery check again? We can't tell at this point. Okay, we can't tell. The House is not even really in session now. People are under orders to come back within 24 hours if they have to take a vote. But things are in Nancy Pelosi's hands again. So behind the scenes, she's still trying to negotiate something. And Schumer also. They're trying to get the Republicans to come back to the table. But Dave Dayen doesn't even think people will come back to the table again until after September 14th. The Republicans don't appear to be motivated to do anything for people. Which, by the way, I really don't understand why Trump isn't putting the arm on people in his party right now, immediately, on the phone to all of them to get back to Washington and get a deal. Maybe he thinks his stupid executive orders are going to work. Nobody thinks they're going to work except for him. So I don't know when we're going to get an economic recovery check again. The Carmen. Maybe put off until November now. I don't know. They may not be able to make a deal till the end of September. Then they have to get the checks out. Trump may actually like that. If he can get them to go for a big enough check with his signature on it, just before elections, he's going to think that's going to put him over the top. That's going to get him over the top. Sandy Dick says they have a convention on the 30th. Are you talking about the People's Party? The movement for a People's Party, Sandy? I thought they were going to have a convention on the same day as the Democrats on the 17th. Is that not so? Kay says People's Party backs progressives as of now. Yes, I agree. And Lana says I have already ordered my mail-in ballot and also used one for my primary yesterday. It'll probably count in the primary yesterday. I think there's still enough of post office. Carmen says, okay, except within, quote, the sleep with my cousin, unquote, segment. Who's in the sleep with my cousin segment? And but Nancy Blackmar, hi Nancy, says, as usual, you are spot on. Thanks. Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for coming. Carmen says, stupid executive order by a stupid orange executive. Sandy Day says yes. Okay, thank you, folks. I think I am at the end of the comments. So unless there are any further questions, Sandy links to the peoplesconvention.org. Thank you, Sandy. So we can click on that and find out exactly the day. Carmen says the rednecks and racists. Yes. What about the rednecks and racists? And the R&Rs. Lana says, good night, all. Good night, Lana. Carmen says, night, love. Thanks again. Okay, I imagine that you're referring to Lana. Carmen. Oh, I do have a few announcements to make. Okay, is today Wednesday? Yes, it's Wednesday. Okay. So, okay, I have now put out, I believe, 3 shorter videos this week, 3 short takes this week. I have another 2 short takes to go. One will go up, okay, a little later tonight. The other will go up sometime tomorrow, probably midday sometime. Tomorrow night, I'd like to have a Q&A session to give people a chance to ask questions about the short takes, because the short takes don't come with any question periods, okay, of course. So I think it would be a good time to have a Q&A tomorrow, okay, about the short takes. And so that's what we'll be doing tomorrow. And of course, all kinds of issues can emerge during the short takes. So that should be very entertaining and very energizing, I think. Okay, says, thank you, Joe, and everybody. I live for these discussions. Well, I kind of live for these discussions too. They're really nice. They're really good. I really like them. So that's another reason why we're going to have a Q&A tomorrow, so we can have a really good discussion. Kay says, so nice to have like-minded folks to talk with. Thank you, Kay. Okay, good night, everybody. I will see you tomorrow at 9 p.m. if the creeks don't rise.